Drink it down.
I feel like these videos always start the same way. I've got to establish to any newcomers that I'm not just some ranting, raving Nintendo hater. I've got to be like, I love Nintendo. They make some of the freshest, most clever and inventive games in the industry. I grew up with Nintendo. They're like a dear friend to me. But sometimes they do some stuff that I just cannot get behind. They're a company. It's their job to make money, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they'll dabble in anti-consumer practices that make them money at the expense of customer trust. And since this is a Nintendo-themed channel and I am a highly opinionated individual who is very wary of companies who want to exploit their customers, or their employees, or anyone for that matter, I would be remiss not to... You know what? We don't need to do all this. Let's just get on with it. Nintendo is doing something gross, and I don't like it. Here is a video about why. This all started a few months ago when Nintendo gave us a very delightful Mario-themed Direct announcing a number of products to coincide with the plumber's 35th anniversary. A few of these products, however, came with one little caveat. They wouldn't be around forever. In the case of something like the Mario Game & Watch, it's at least somewhat understandable. The audience for that kind of thing can't be too huge, and I guess they want to produce some, sell them, and be done with it. I can get on their case for making so few NES and Super NES minis, but the Game & Watch thing, alright, I'll give them that. But Super Mario Bros. 35, Nintendo's Mario-themed take on the Battle Royale? That's a bit harder to swallow. It's a very cool idea, and a lot of people are having a blast with it, so why would they insist on closing it down in March 2021? The first idea that pops into my mind is that the older an online game gets, the harder it will be for players to find matches and connect with each other, especially in a game where connecting with exactly 34 other players is your only option. But that idea doesn't hold too much water. Tetris 99 is still going strong today, and if anything is gonna have the same kind of staying power Tetris does, it's Mario, right? Especially if they keep developing new stuff for it. Okay, so if that's not the case, then maybe it's because Mario 35 is free, and Nintendo doesn't want to pay to keep it running forever? Well, that doesn't make much sense either. I can't imagine it's the most expensive game to run. It acts as a nice incentive for people to subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online, and if they want to make some money off it, they can just add in some simple monetization like in Tetris 99. Nope, I can't think of a reason why Nintendo would need to erase Mario 35 from existence in a few months' time. Or at least I can't think of a good reason. There is indeed a likely reason, but we'll be talking about that soon enough. First, we gotta talk about the worst offender of all in that Mario Direct. Super Mario 3D All-Stars is something we've been looking forward to for a long time. Even before rumors started circulating about such a collection earlier this year, naturally everyone was already longing to play more legacy titles on their Switches. Ever since the system's reveal, the idea of playing Nintendo's vast catalog of games on the go has been an exciting one. And while the NES and Super NES selection on NSO has been nice, it's also left a lot to be desired for reasons I probably don't need to remind you of. But this 3D All-Stars collection, this was finally something to really sink our teeth into. It wasn't a full virtual console service or a large line of N64, GameCube, and Wii games to play on NSO or anything like that, but it was something. It was finally an opportunity to, at the very least, play these 3 specific beloved games on Switch. And guess what? This collection is only available until March 2021. It is a product that you can buy now, but you won't be able to later. And no, not even in digital form. It will be pulled from the eShop as well after that date. After it gets taken down, it will be a product that Nintendo created and could sell to you for great profit, but will choose not to. All this was already enough to inspire me to make a video on the topic, but as I was preparing to write the script, yet another piece fell into place on this grim puzzle. Nintendo announced that they were finally localizing the original version of the first Fire Emblem game in celebration of the series' anniversary, and that this too would be removed from the eShop in March 2021. No, it's not just the physical collector's edition that's getting a limited release, as some people seem to think. That would make more sense. But Nintendo's own website clearly states that the game itself will no longer be available for purchase in a few months. And if I was already prepared to make a video on the topic of limited releases, realizing they weren't gonna stop with the Mario anniversary stuff, and that for all we know, they might not stop anytime soon, well, that was enough to light a fire under my tush. Because if and you ask this here monster, he'll tell you he thinks this whole thing is absolute hooey. Before we get into the why of it all, first I want to address some of the stuff I've seen people say when defending this practice. Because whether or not they realize it, people are indeed defending it. If a company does something that only harms the consumer with literally zero benefit, and those customers express concern, coming in and asking them what the big deal is and trying to delegitimize those concerns is defending the practice in question. Even if you don't personally feel affected by an anti-consumer practice, dismissing the people who do is defending anti-consumerism. You're absolutely entitled to do that, I can't stop you, but I'm gonna call it like I see it. And the idea that no matter what a company does, there will always be legions of people jumping at the chance to defend them is a disturbing one. If everybody was able to identify poor practices and call out companies in question, we might actually have more power to fight against those practices. Alas, there are defenders in this case, as with every other case, and I want to answer their primary questions. The first one is, how is this any different from any other limited edition anniversary collections Nintendo's done in the past? Then hey, that's a good question. Nintendo has given us anniversary collections before, and those have had limited releases as well. But I've got multiple responses to that. One, limited quantities of purely physical goods make a lot more sense. But in this digital age, the idea of creating a digital good that can be duplicated and sold infinitely with zero production costs or retail competition, and limiting it purposefully is very, very silly. It's artificial scarcity in the purest sense. Two, if Nintendo limited quantities on previous collections to the point where some people couldn't get their hands on them, maybe even back then, that was a really mean thing to do. It's easy to say, it's always been this way, but that doesn't work as well when you start to think that it probably shouldn't have always been this way. And three, doing digital re-releases of legacy titles, then ripping them away again, is particularly cruel in this specific context. As I've said many times, no one has ever wanted access to legacy titles more than now because of the Switch's unique hybrid nature. Nothing is stopping me from digging out my GameCube and playing Super Mario Sunshine on it, but the Switch gives me a great opportunity to play it on the go, on one convenient system, without dealing with cables and discs and such. Plus, a massive number of Switch owners are newcomers to the Nintendo ecosystem or are returning after many years away, and they might not have access to older systems. Now is the time for legacy content. The people are crying out for it more loudly than ever. It doesn't matter if this has been standard in the past, it just doesn't make sense in this day and age, and considering the desires of the masses. Another question I see asked is, what if this is limited entirely to anniversary products? I was disturbed to find that limited releases weren't just for Mario, but the limited release of the first Fire Emblem, which is a part of an anniversary package, did sort of set a trend. It's at least possible that this is something Nintendo plans on doing rarely. Just for the 1 or 2 year period around the turn of the decade when most NES-originated series have their big anniversaries. Well, to that I say, a bad practice is a bad practice. We still shouldn't have to deal with all this limited release nonsense for all the reasons I just gave. We want classic games, and not just sometimes. Many other companies are selling their legacy content, sometimes on many different platforms, and most of them aren't being weird and stingy about it, because they realize that if they have a product people want, letting those people buy it is how they make money. I mean, it's kind of a basic principle. The biggest question people ask about all this, though, is simply, what's the big deal? One of the most effective ways to defend an anti-consumer practice is through simple apathy. People who can't be bothered to care about it, so their instinct is to tell other people they shouldn't care either. If you don't like it, don't buy it. If you want to play classic 3D Mario, just buy it now before it goes away. What's complaining about it going to accomplish? Well, as for that last part, I've said it plenty of times before, but the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If no one ever speaks up about anything, then nothing ever changes. Sales alone aren't enough to go by. Sometimes a company needs to hear things from the mouths of the customers themselves. But more importantly, I am of the opinion that this limited release thing is indeed a big deal for a number of reasons. It might not seem like a big deal to many. It's only re-releases of old games after all, but to me, it sets a scary precedent. Nintendo has been so stingy with their legacy content, as I've talked about on multiple occasions, that it was wonderful to hear they were finally going to start giving us games past the Super NES, even if it was just a handful of Mario titles. I thought maybe this is just the start, the teaser, the appetizer, and soon it will all start coming in. But taking the collection away in March makes it feel like these re-releases aren't a sign that Nintendo will loosen up and start giving us more stuff. It feels like these are the exceptions. It feels like Nintendo is only willing to give us these games if they come with some awful caveat, because just selling them to us would simply be too good. That doesn't give me much hope that we're going to start seeing more N64 and GameCube and Wii games on NSO or on the Switch at all. Additionally, the subjects of video game preservation and ownership are very serious ones, and anyone concerned about them can see that the idea of a company givething only to taketh away a few months later is, kinda terrifying. The digital age has already got us asking questions about what it means to own a game, how long a digital collection can exist, what might happen to a game when it's not properly preserved in its original state. And unfortunately, the rules are being written by a bunch of giant companies that don't seem too concerned about any of it. They're often just looking to make a quick buck, and what happens to these games down the line doesn't bother them too much. In fact, it goes even further than that. With the rise of streaming tech and subscription models, these companies are drooling at the idea that someday we might pay for all our games, but own none of them. So we're forced to keep paying in perpetuity for the privilege to play. We see this in companies like Bethesda. They used to be happy putting out great big games that people loved buying by the millions and millions. But the world is never enough, and we've heard as much straight out of the mouth of Bethesda's Todd Howard himself. In an interview, he expressed how annoyed he was that all these years later, people are still playing Skyrim, but they're not still paying for it. They made a game so good that almost a decade later, people are still playing it, and that bothers him.
Millions and millions of people every month playing those games, and we have no touch point with them. Right? It's just like, we ship the game, we do some mod stuff, but here you go.
That's exactly the kind of attitude that scares me coming from video game executives. And limited releases of legacy content might not seem like a big deal, but the idea that owning an old game is a privilege that should be severely limited is one that comes from a very poor mindset. Some might accuse me of using a slippery slope fallacy here, but some slopes really and truly are slippery. What Nintendo's doing right now might be a small step, but it's a step in the exact wrong direction. And in the game industry, the small steps are the ones you have to look out for most. Big steps can cause big stinks, and companies don't want that. When you want to do something quote-unquote bad, the best strategy is to slowly change what people consider to be normal. You have to turn bad into the new normal. Just look at how ridiculous monetization has become. There was once a time when DLC was the extent of monetization, and people would get grumpy if they suspected a company worked on a DLC pack in tandem with the base game instead of waiting until the end of development. That was like the big thing to watch out for. But then fast forward just a few years. Games where you have to spend hundreds to get the full experience. Full-price AAA games that are monetized with pay-to-win mechanics as though they're free-to-play mobile games. Cosmetic systems that rake in millions from kids who don't want to be bullied for having default skins. Single-player adventures that introduce purposefully grindy and frustrating leveling systems just so they can sell you XP multipliers. Sports games jam-packed with in-game ads and product placement and even unskippable video ads as though you're watching TV. Loot boxes that not only prey upon people with gambling addictions, but are being proven to create gambling addictions in children. It might seem like I'm going off on a tangent here, and luckily Nintendo hasn't sunk this low, but the point I'm trying to make is that none of this happened overnight. It all happened one tiny little step at a time. It happened so gradually that this is simply the new normal. Companies can get away with stuff that would have been absolutely unheard of 10 years ago. And that's why Nintendo even playing with the idea of limited releases scares me. It's one little step, but what might the next little step be? And the one after that? How many steps might there be between an old game with a limited release and a brand new one with a limited release? Don't get me wrong, there's a fine chance that they'll never even take that second step besides with free games like Mario 35. But what if someone else takes that step? Plenty of very slimy practices originate from relatively benign ones, or even good ones. The idea of DLC used to be nothing but awesome. It was a way to get more content for a game you love. But now look what's happened to it in the mainstream gaming world. And if Nintendo was willing to take this little step, what if someone from Activision Blizzard or EA catch wind of it and think, well, that's an interesting idea? Presumably while twiddling their little mustaches. The game industry collectively shares the burden of any one anti-consumer practice going unchallenged. It doesn't matter who sets the precedent as long as it's set. If it seems too extreme to imagine this limited release thing becoming a serious problem, just look at the last decade or so of gaming. Making and selling content beyond a base game was originally one person's idea and the rest followed. Everything originates from one person's idea. And that leads us to the why. Why is Nintendo doing this? Why can't they just sell us these games or put them on NSO and be done with it? And why is this something another company might want to adopt? Well, there's one very strong possibility, and it ain't a pretty one. One word: FOMO. Fear of missing out. So, actually, I guess it's 4 words. One acronym, whatever. FOMO is another insidious concept that's been plaguing the game industry. In a world where online games are bigger than ever, it's all too easy to squeeze extra money out of a person by making them feel like if they don't act now, they might regret it. Everyone's getting in on this. You don't want to miss out, do you? Better pre-order the Mega Premium Platinum Edition of that game so you're not left dissatisfied with your inferior Super Deluxe Gold Edition on launch day. Better get the Battle Pass now so you can get those extra skins you'll probably never use, because if you do decide to use them and don't have them, you'll look like a total loser. Oof, and people wonder why I mainly focus on Nintendo. Basically, people are highly manipulatable, and game companies are always very eager to exploit that fact. And FOMO is one of the ways they do it. Obviously, I can't possibly know what Nintendo's actual intentions are here, but to an observer, it looks like they're limiting their releases to capitalize on FOMO. It looks like they're pulling a Disney from a couple decades ago. This legacy content is too special to simply sell to you. We must put it all in a vault, and every once in a while we will pull one movie out and sell it for a few moments, then it will go right back in the vault.
Don't you wish you bought Pinocchio when you had the chance? Wouldn't you love to have Lady and the Tramp in your collection? Now they're gone. And time's running out for Cinderella, too.
The aim was, of course, to create a desperate scramble to buy these products. People didn't want to miss their chance, so they had to jump on it right when they could. In the case of the Disney Vault, it was particularly nasty because not only was it artificial scarcity, it was scheduled, widely advertised artificial scarcity. They trained their customers to expect it so that everyone would know exactly when to rush out and buy movies in a crazy fit. And I'm sorry, but that is just gross. So far, Nintendo has only given us a handful of titles that they plan on taking away later, but I don't like the idea that someday this might not just be a normal practice, but an expected practice. I don't like the idea that someday we'll all be literally waiting for the next re-release that we've got a small window to buy. And I can't stress enough that even if that never happens, even if this is just a random thing that only happens sometimes or with certain kinds of content, it still supports a very unhealthy economy for Nintendo's products. The company is, unfortunately, no stranger to the concept of artificial scarcity and/or simply underproducing highly sought-after items. And in literally every case, it enables one specific type of person, and that person ain't the customer. I am, of course, referring to that scourge of collectors everywhere, the scalper. Have any of you had a hard time getting your hands on a physical copy of Super Mario 3D All-Stars? Maybe you went to pre-order the Fire Emblem Collector's Edition set and found you were out of luck? It turned out that in both cases, scalpers using bots had already grabbed up most of the copies and listed them on eBay before they were even released? And don't get me started about the amiibos and the special edition systems and basically any physical item that Nintendo's released in limited quantities in the last several years. It's an absurd practice that I could talk about for a long time if I let myself. It takes a substantial amount of Nintendo's own profit and hands it right over to scalpers. And in the end, it's the customers who have to pick up the slack. In these cases, their only options are to get lucky, pay through the nose, or simply go without.
Today, some people in the toy business suspect Nintendo's holding games back. And while videotaping in Japan, we did see plenty of the hard-to-get cartridges.
I've done 7 stores a day for 3 weeks now. I cannot find it.
Even beyond what it does to the physical market, though, it just plain seems like a sleazy thing to do. These beloved Mario games are going to sit unlisted in our database forever. If you want them, you've got to buy them right now. You can't wait for the price to go down or to try to find a cheaper physical copy down the line. If you can't afford to get a Switch until next year, you can't play these games. End of story. Geez, then Mario 35 might not feel like as big a deal as 3D All-Stars, but the fact that it won't even be playable after March makes it feel just as nasty. You want to talk about missing out? Those other Mario games might come back sometime in some form, but if you want to play this fun new Mario Battle Royale, this is your one singular chance, probably ever. Hope you were looking to get a Switch this Christmas or you're out of luck. We put in all the time developing the game, and even if it's still seeing millions of players a day in March, we are shutting it down forever. And here's a big thing. Do you think it's any coincidence that Nintendo's fiscal year ends in March? The industry at large places a whole lot of importance on financial gains within each fiscal year, to the point where some companies make self-destructive decisions just to make a few extra bucks this year, because money later means nothing. Money now is everything. I tend to see Nintendo as better and wiser than that. They're always thinking about the long term. And that's why it's disturbing to think that limiting these releases is an attempt to capitalize on FOMO for the sole purpose of giving this fiscal year one last boost. It's already been a great year. Animal Crossing and the preposterous sales of the Switch have seen to that. Is it possible that this success has made them just that much more desperate to break every record possible? Because that's not exactly in line with some of the short-sighted decisions other companies make, but as I keep saying, it's a step in the wrong direction. And as I said earlier, it sets a bad precedent that I'd hate to see repeated later by Nintendo or anyone else. Now, there are other potential reasons they're doing this. Maybe they're taking these games away, but next year they're going to give the Switch the full legacy game treatment, so it doesn't really matter. That would certainly solve the problem of no longer being able to purchase these games, but wow, that would not help the whole grossness thing. Pretending that we can't have legacy games, getting us nice and desperate, then sending us into a buying frenzy with a few choice limited releases just to wring as much money from these titles as possible, then being like, all right, just kidding, here you go, have whatever you want. Yeah, not the best look for them. Even if it's just these specific games that end up getting relisted later, perhaps as standalone downloads, that's still pretty gross. That would seem an awful lot like Nintendo trying to trick people into buying 3 Mario games at once, even if they only want 1 or 2 of them. There's another possible reason Nintendo is doing this limited release thing though, and it just might be the most disturbing of all. Yes, even more disturbing than the idea of them capitalizing on FOMO. The company has shown a baffling hesitance to re-release legacy content, but the general hope is that they're just taking their time, and that eventually we will indeed have access to N64 and GameCube and Wii games and whatever else on our Switches. But what if... Oh, I don't want to say this out loud. What if that's simply not the case? What if they don't actually want us to have access to old games? Or at least they want to severely limit which old games we can play and when? I've touched on this idea before, and I know this is going to come across as super cynical, but I can't help but at least consider the idea. What if they don't want us knowing how good their old games are? I mean, seriously, take a series like Paper Mario. I know, it's Arlo complaining about Paper Mario again, but bear with me. They changed the series, and the vast majority of fans want it to change back, but Nintendo absolutely refuses to let it. They've got their vision for it, and that's that. And honestly, it must be a lot easier for Nintendo to push the series in this new direction when most people have no idea what the old games were even like. As I've talked about before, a whole lot of people defended Origami King and shamed classic Paper Mario fans without even having the full picture. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure if everyone had access to the classic games, the reception to Origami King might not have been as strong as it was. Or at least it would have been different. I'm not saying people are wrong to like the game. I respect every single person who enjoyed it, and complaining about it isn't the point at all. I'm saying that I think the conversation surrounding it would have been different in that case. There would have been more people looking at both eras of Paper Mario, and that would have changed the conversation in a way that was not exactly conducive to Nintendo selling copies of their new game. When you have a clear picture of where a series came from and where it's going, you have a lot more people with very strong opinions about that journey. Nintendo probably liked that not everyone had played the old games. That gave them a lot of fresh players who weren't trying to compare anything. They were more likely to take Origami King as something completely new. And it's not just Paper Mario, it's anything. The Pokémon Company not wanting to re-release old games in their original forms because it might interfere with the sales of their newer games might not necessarily be true, but it's a sentiment I hear all the time. Game Freak is famous for introducing features only to remove them later, and they also probably don't want a clear timeline laid out for everyone to see. Nintendo is never, ever, not even in a million years going to re-release Melee, or any Smash game for that matter, because they don't want players going back to the good one, whatever the good one even is at the time. And like, I sort of get it to an extent. Nintendo wants to maximize their sales and all that. But being scared of giving us old games because we might just go play those instead would say a lot about their mindset. It would basically be admitting that their new games aren't as good, yet they're unwilling to take feedback in order to make games more in line with what fans actually want. I'm not saying this is strictly true, but it's what such a mindset would communicate to me. It wouldn't only be an extremely unhealthy perspective concerning their legacy content, it would also further highlight their own stubbornness when it comes to their new content. A desire to keep an iron-fisted stranglehold on old games simply to better control the discourse surrounding their IPs would just about be as pitifully outdated as you can get. Sacrificing the series' growing potential legacy content affords just so they can protect their ability to not listen to fans? Again, it might not be the case, but as with many of the ideas presented in this video, I find it very disturbing. Okay, even if you want to lay off the conspiracy theories for a moment and suggest that there's some less nefarious reason Nintendo is being so stingy with their old games, there's no denying that being stingy at all is silly. Protectively hoarding content like some kind of dragon, only tossing out 1 or 2 re-releases every once in a while just to drum up some buzz and make a quick buck, is a very short-sighted thing to do. The benefits of offering legacy content are so vast that an unwillingness to do so, whatever that reason might be, can't possibly be indicative of a healthy mindset. So I can only hope that there is some weird reason legacy content is taking so long to get here and that it does indeed come eventually, and that this limited release ordeal isn't because of some deep stinginess and unwillingness to commit to a substantial classic game service or give up any control of their IPs. And now I come to the very depressing part of the video. It's the part where, despite all this, despite how anti-consumer and woefully short-sighted I believe Nintendo's actions are, I admit that limiting a game's release works. If Nintendo is trying to capitalize on FOMO, it's working. Super Mario 3D All-Stars is selling by the millions and millions. It will no doubt soon be in the top 10 list of first-party Switch games. And even if it's not necessarily selling because of its limited release and FOMO, we can see that it's probably not selling because of its limited release. People don't like that Nintendo is doing this, but it's not enough to stop most of them from buying it anyway. There are some people putting their foot down, and I can certainly respect those people, but I don't think they're the majority. I bought the stupid thing. I didn't want to miss my chance to have those games. If Nintendo pushes the idea too far, then maybe we'll end up seeing more boycotters, but it takes a lot to reach that point. Most of the time, people are going to just swallow their pride and buy the thing they want to buy, myself included, because it can be hard to feel like your vote counts when no one else is voting the same way. If 99% of people are going to buy the game anyway, you not buying it only seems like it amounts to you not having it. It doesn't always feel like it will actually change anything. And it's pretty disappointing, I've got to admit. But despite the fact that sales haven't been impacted, I will never stop arguing that this is poor business on Nintendo's part. Because as Nintendo themselves have demonstrated, flying directly in the faces of many of their peers, money now should not be the ultimate goal. Long-term success should be the ultimate goal. And you attain long-term success by having the right mindset. For a legacy company like Nintendo, it means properly leveraging your properties in order to consistently make money from old content while building up fans so you can make money from new content as well. It's an idea I've gone on and on about. And, as Nintendo has demonstrated in the past, long-term success also comes down to establishing and maintaining trust with the customer. They've done plenty to make us mad, and this generation in particular we're seeing some nasty hardware issues, but they've also done a lot over the years to make people feel happy with their purchases. Unlike most companies, I get the vibe from most of Nintendo's executives that it's not just about the money, that it's genuinely about the happiness as well. This kind of trust and happiness exchange happens over a long period. And limiting the release of a game for no reason that benefits the customer does not fit into these long-term focused philosophies. It's not a practice that belongs in a company like Nintendo, if you ask me. Because as I've demonstrated, it doesn't matter what Nintendo's own mindset and intentions are here. It doesn't matter what they intend to do with these games in the future, if they're keeping that stranglehold forever, or they're giving us these games eventually, or if they're capitalizing on FOMO, or whatever. This is a step in the wrong direction. This hurts their customers, pure and simple, which is not the Nintendo I like to think I know. And even if you set aside the ethics of it, even if you say, oh, Nintendo's a company, they gotta make money, yada yada yada, I still don't feel that it's a good business decision in the long run. It's worth mentioning that it's absolutely possible that this will all just blow over. Maybe this is a little experiment and there's no toxic mindset behind any of it, and after Fire Emblem there won't be any more limited releases. Or maybe they'll simply change their minds. Just look at Jump Rope Challenge. It was on its way out, and Nintendo decided to keep it around for the foreseeable future. Could the same thing happen to these other games? I'm not gonna bet money on it, but it's technically possible. Though if I want to throw a pessimistic spin on that outcome, that would further support the idea that Nintendo doesn't currently have a solid plan when it comes to providing more legacy content. You see that? You see what just happened? Really, that right there is the whole point I'm trying to make. I've looked at this thing from every different angle I can think of, and no matter what, the idea of delivering legacy content but limiting its release just doesn't lead to any good conclusions. It doesn't fit with any kind of healthy mindset on Nintendo's part. It doesn't bode well for the future of legacy content or any content in any way. It doesn't do one single good thing for the customer, and that's why it worries me so much. No, it's not the biggest deal in the world, as many people have pointed out, but the road to darker lands is taken one step at a time. Being a small step doesn't make it any less scary. I know this video was very long, but it's a subject I'm pretty passionate about, so it feels good to get it all out. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. I really hope I did it all justice, and that my reasoning was at least mostly sound. But what about you? Is this one big, who cares, Nintendo gonna Nintendo, or are you polishing your pitchfork even as you watch this? Whatever the case, I would very much like to have a respectful conversation about it down in the comments. Oh, and be sure to share this video all over and tell all your friends they need to watch it now because I'm deleting it in 3 months.